We are less than a week from the curtain raising on the 2024-25 NHL season. After a busy and, at times, properly curious and also sad off-season, all 32 franchises are back on the ice and ready to contest to see who will be this year's Stanley Cup champion. I've already made a video grading each franchise's vibes entering the season, so feel free to head over to that video if you want a kind of pseudo-season preview. However, if you want my look ahead to the opening salvos of this season, watch on. The Florida Panthers, after 30 mostly futile seasons, enter the campaign as defending champions, while Utah HC begins afresh in a new city after 27 years of trauma and mismanagement in Arizona. Technically, the season starts October 4th when Buffalo and New Jersey face off in Prague in the 2024 NHL Global Series. But the bulk of the games begin October 8th, and today I'm going to give you all the lowdown on what games I'll be watching and why this opening week of the season. I was tempted to be salty and not add this one. As a Brit, it has been 17 years since the NHL was last on British soil, when Anaheim and Los Angeles started the season in the old Millennium Dome. In the last few years, the British national team has competed semi-regularly in the top pool of the World Championships, had an English-born and trained player drafted into the NHL, and has seen the NFL, MLB and NBA make London a regular stop. The fucking MLB, we don't even have a professional baseball league in the UK. It's also a bummer because I was just over in Prague to watch the British national team get relegated back out of the top pool of the Worlds in what was my first opportunity to see the national team at the top level of IIHF competition. Having watched Britain get promoted in Hungary after a 25-year absence and falling to the third tier of the Worlds in that time, it was a pretty bitter pill having work and COVID prevent me from travelling to see Team GB compete against NHL calibre and top European players. What I can say is the venue is superb. It's steep, the atmosphere was great even when the Czechs weren't playing, and it has an old school type concourse. But for the matter at hand, this is an intriguing matchup, not least because it pits Lindy Ruff, the vibes hire for Buffalo, against the team he struggled so woefully with the season before. Buffalo ended last season on a tear, but it wasn't enough to save Don Granato. While they ultimately came up short, if they can carry that form into this season, there are spaces in the wildcard spots for Buffalo if they want to end their 13-year postseason absence. I was tipping Buffalo to make a run at this year, but Kevyn Adams' postseason work was underwhelming, and it'll be interesting to see if Lindy Ruff's run and gun style continues to scrub away the cobwebs for the Sabres, and if Ruff can flush out the country club atmosphere that was said to have fermented in the Buffalo locker room last year. I'm excited to see if Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen can carry his form into this season, and if Devon Levi or James Reimer will back him up. Levi was badly exposed last year when given a chance, and while his numbers were poor, the defending in front of him was bafflingly bad when protecting a rookie. The Devils, meanwhile, are a team that often flatter to deceive. A lot of people's dark horses entering last season, they were fourth favourites with bookmakers, yet Ruff's charges collapsed like a bad souffle behind abject goaltending, injuries to key players, and a style of play that just didn't suit the parts at Ruff's disposal. Now coached by Sheldon Keefe, who will enjoy a far more balanced roster than he had in Toronto, the Devils who played under Ruff will be familiar with the run and gun the Sabres are likely to deploy. Once again, the Devils are heavily fancied, and there's no question Jacob Markstrom is a massive upgrade on Vitek Vanacek. Ruff must be sore at having been unable to buy a save with a sieve in net during his tenure. Vanacek's poor play often put Ruff's Devils on the back foot, and the goaltending was only rectified once Ruff was binned off. Keefe will also benefit from a fully fit Dougie Hamilton, whose absence meant Vanacek was underprotected. I expect the Devils to challenge for a Metropolitan Division title if they can keep their key players fit, but you can bet Lindy Ruff will be looking to exact some revenge on his old roster with a young Sabres team who have to show some more backbone this year. October 8th is when the season really kicks off, and Lord knows why the NHL decide to do this on a Tuesday night rather than have all the teams start on the weekend and have games all day Saturday and Sunday. Come on, Gary, you could have games at 1 PM, 4 PM, 7 PM, and 10 PM for the West, both days, and give fans with nothing better to do like myself the chance to watch half the league straight out of the block. As fun as the Global Series games are, they are usually attended by European hockey enthusiasts as opposed to die-hard fan bases, so bringing the games back to North America and the excitement of home crowds seeing their teams on home ice is when the curtain really raises for me. Well, at least until the league comes back to the UK or Japan. Lord knows why they chose this fixture, however. I cannot think of a less appealing pairing to drop the puck on the season in North America, and I'd hardly be recommending it if it were not for the scheduling significance. Seattle enter the season with a new coach in Dan Bylsma, who's had a trek through the hockey wilderness since lifting the cup in 2009 and his meteoric rise with Pittsburgh through the 2010s. Descent in Buffalo was followed by a swift demotion to an assistant in Detroit. Since then, Bylsma has had to rebuild his reputation in the AHL with the Kraken's Coachella Valley affiliate. He now helms a team that were victims of overachievement in their sophomore year, predicated on unsustainable statistics. Having regressed to the mean last season, there is a palpable frustration in the Seattle fanbase when they look over to what the Golden Knights have achieved. Ron Francis has struggled to do much in free agency, Montour and Stevenson are workman-like hires on bloated contracts, and the Kraken forward core feels like it's made up of too many character players and too little quality. St. Louis, meanwhile, are a team in desperate need of direction. 6 seasons out from lifting the cup, their fan base bemoans being the forgotten team in the NHL, while the club has steadily regressed into mediocrity. Offer-sheeting Broberg and Holloway, while it threw the Oilers fanbase into a collective meltdown, has done little to improve the Blues other than give them some headlines and a younger roster. Getting a chance to see the contentious pair make their Blues debuts may be one of the reasons to watch this game, but only if you have a salty Oilers fan to watch it with. There's a lot of middling teams in the West, and so the wildcard places are up for grabs, but both Seattle and St. Louis feel like two of the weaker teams in the muddy middle. Drew Bannister was once the head coach of my local team in Glasgow, Scotland, so I guess that's something, but I doubt that'll be much cause for excitement for anyone other than Blues, Kraken, or Glasgow Clan fans. Both teams will be keen to get out of the gates fast and draw a line in the sand for an opponent both will see as competition for the wildcard slots. Hot on the heels of the Blues and Kraken comes a far more tantalising matchup. After what feels like an existence filled with futility, irrelevance, pain, and even the threat of relocation, the Florida Panthers will start the 2024-25 campaign by lifting a Stanley Cup Championship banner into the rafters of whatever corporate sponsor is naming their arena this year. Now is a time to consolidate a hard-won fan base that is still often derided for its size. Today you will see Panthers merchandise when hitting the streets in the towns and cities in and around Miami and Sunrise, and while many hockey fans will bemoan Sunbelt hockey, seeing healthy franchises provides a high tide that raises all ships. And while lifting the banner will be a huge boon for the fanbase, it'll be interesting to see how Florida fare having lost a chunk of their defensive core and character depth in free agency. It was always going to be nigh on impossible to keep the band together entering free agency with just 14 players signed up. Re-signing Sam Reinhart was priority one, and retaining talent such as Anton Lundell was vital going forward. But losing Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Brandon Montour, Anthony Stolarz, Ryan Lomberg, Kyle Okposo, and Kevin Stenlund was a high cost. Florida won last season with sheer compete, and the consistency Boston have experienced these last 5 seasons has been predicated on a similar ethos of work ethic and grit. No team has scored as many accumulated points over the last 5 seasons than the Boston Bruins, and while that hasn't translated into playoff success, they have provided the baseline for regular season success for the last half-decade, even defying conventional wisdom last year when they were expected to regress in a post-Bergeron era. In Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov, Boston have made nice pickups this preseason. Lindholm and Zadorov both signed out of Vancouver, while DeBrusk, Heinen, and Forbort signed the other way. While it wasn't an actual trade, it may as well have been, and one that checks and balances wise favours the Bruins. Zadorov in particular is a very Bruinsy pickup and comes in off a virtuoso so-so postseason in the West. Losing Ullmark for Korpisalo is a distinct downgrade and breaks up the Swayman-Ullmark bromance that has been the backbone of the Bruins' adamantine defense for these past 3 seasons. Swayman's ongoing contract negotiations will give reasons for concern for the Bees fanbase, but there will be few better opening week matchups than Swayman versus Bobrovsky, assuming Swayman is signed by the start of the season. 2 of the highest compete level teams in the East and both likely to be in the mix come season's end. This will be must-watch TV. Had this fixture occurred last year, it would be difficult to recommend a game between an abject AHL quality team featuring Connor Bedard and an Arizona Coyotes team being used by a billionaire idiot to launder profit through a contract chart filled with spurious retained contracts. Fast forward 12 months, however, and it would be churlish not to watch the first NHL game played out of the Delta Center in Salt Lake City. Right now, the arena looks a curious venue for NHL hockey and clearly not optimized for anything other than basketball. While that will improve in the future, this will be the first opportunity for fans of the nameless club to watch NHL-level hockey in their backyards after decades of supporting minor league teams such as the Utah Grizzlies. With Salt Lake City being awarded the 2034 Winter Olympics this July, it's an exciting time to be a hockey fan in Utah, and more so because they've inherited a great young core of players cobbled together through years of futility. In many ways, it's a raw irony for Coyotes fans seeing the likes of Clayton Keller, Barrett Hayton, Logan Cooley, Dylan Gumpfer and Josh Doan leave their city. This is a young forward core that could be the foundation of an extremely successful franchise in the years to come. However, what they inherited up front was the opposite to the blue line. Bill Armstrong had no defenseman signed headed into free agency, but still managed to jury-rig a decent back 6 together with Mikhail Sergachev and the re-signed Sean Dursey the pick of the bunch. Chicago, meanwhile, pivoted away from youth this offseason to concentrate on being a more watchable and competitive team and give generational talent Connor Bedard a viable foundation on which to hone his limitless talents. Few teams were as collectively active as Utah and Chicago this offseason. While Utah had to completely rebuild their blue line, Chicago injected a quantum fuckton of experience into their roll call. With the Central Division in particular tooling up, bringing in the likes of Martinez, Teravainen, Brody, Bertuzzi and Maroon was vital to help Chicago take steps forward and not regress further behind the pack. This should be a fun and intriguing matchup and a barometer to see where both franchises stand after a busy offseason. I don't think either will make the playoffs, but a winning start could lay the groundwork for a surprise. It would be fair to say some of the vim has been lost from the El Clasico of the NHL in the last few years. Since the Canadiens' surprise run to the Cup beneath the dreadful shadow of COVID, the Canadiens have been in a state of rebuild, while Toronto have been consistently one of the most successful teams in the East. Well, until the playoffs, where their consistency has been measured in futility. While I don't expect the Canadiens to make drastic leaps forward this season with too many questions through centre and in net, no team has better epitomised an almost fanatical and steadfast approach to rebuilding than Kent Hughes and the Habs. When you look at the struggles in Detroit, Ottawa, Buffalo or Anaheim to get the ship turned around, the Canadiens already seem to be rounding back on course. And that's off the back of a quiet off-season only shattered in late August when the Habs tied up the contract of Blue Jackets 1-8 Patrick Laine. Laine for me is a boom or bust pickup in that he had his emotional struggles in Columbus, and Montreal, with its laser-focused media, seems an odd place for him to land, particularly if he is looking to compete right out of the blocks. He also struggled on the ice, and part of that was due to a lack of a competent centre to tee him up, and Montreal may be the second finished team at centre in the Eastern Conference. It'll be interesting to see how Slavkovsky responds, having signed a big contract to remain in Montreal. Slavkovsky excelled in his sophomore season after disappointing as a rookie, and now we will see if his development curve is a line or a sine wave. The Maple Leafs remain a fascinating team, the fourth most consistent team league-wide in terms of regular season points accrued over the last 5 seasons. They feel like a downhill skier, pushing themselves to the very edge only to bin it spectacularly in sight of the finishing line. This season will very likely be the end of the core 4, or it should be. That consistency has not translated into postseason success, and with both Mitch Marner and John Tavares entering contract years, perhaps it's time to cut the cord. If I was to keep either, it would be Tavares, but he would have to take a massive pay cut, and having already relinquished the captaincy, that would seem a double kick in the grits. The off-season was dominated by talk of Mitch Marner being traded. That never materialised, but the toxic elements of his camp remain. Will Marner be a point-a-game player when detached from the hip of Austin Matthews? Will Austin Matthews continue scoring at the same clip as last year? With so much cap tied up in 4 forwards, the Leafs pose little threat beneath their top 2 lines, and losing Tyler Bertuzzi hasn't helped that. However, the Leafs have massively upgraded their back end, and Chris Tanev certainly brings that postseason grit sorely lacking throughout the rest of the roster. The Canadiens lost all 3 meetings with Toronto last year. Expect St. Louis and his Chargers to want to right those wrongs in this matchup. Right after Montreal and Toronto comes this matchup from Sin City. If you've watched my Vibes video, you'll know I am not extremely high on either of these franchises. I have a weird feeling the Avs may struggle this season as a team with so much cap space tied up in players relegated to the fringe due to personal issues and injury, while Kelly McCrimmon's highly aggressive approach to roster management has started to deteriorate, probably earlier than I anticipated, and I gave them the only F in the league. Now, I don't build my channel on hate. I'm an Islanders fan, but I'm a hockey fan first and foremost, and I try and remain objective for the purposes of YouTube. I know Golden Knights fans feel like they get dogpiled on by the rest of the league, but my issue isn't with the fans, although there are some wild backs-to-the-wall takes on r/Golden Knights. I just really despise how Kelly McCrimmon has gone about building and maintaining this roster, and I can't help enjoy a little schadenfreude seeing agents and players rebel. I get hockey is a business. I don't even care, especially about the LTIR circumvention, because it's available to everyone, but there's a reason why the other 31 GMs, with the possible exception of Julian Brisebois in Tampa, don't conduct their business this way, because eventually it comes home to roost, and in Vegas that was in the form of an exodus of talent and 200 points of offense. Meanwhile, their hopes now pivot on 2 extremely injury-prone players. VGK have hardly been stockpiling prospects and picks under McCrimmon, so it will be interesting how they plug the dam, particularly if Stone or Eichel go down injured. The Avs, meanwhile, are a team undermined by inconsistent goaltending and a lack of depth scoring. With so much cap in stasis in case Gabe Landeskog or Valeri Nichushkin return, Chris McFarland had his hands tied when it came to moving in free agency for an Askarov or Brossois, who could have provided a 1B option in net. Having the likes of Nathan McKinnon, Devon Taves and Cale Makar on your roster means you're always going to compete, but I don't fancy this Avs team to be the dependent dominant force that has seen them the second most consistent regular season team for the last 5 years. This feels like a real yardstick game for 2 teams who could see regression this term. While I still think the Avs will be a playoff team, I suspect the Golden Knights are really going to be in the trenches, and a poor start to the season will not help. I have had to overhaul this part of my script. I was going to recommend this game anyway because of the needle between Dean Everson and the Minnesota Wild, but sadly that will not be the reason I'll be watching. For context, I started writing this script on August 29th. A day later, Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau were gone. I was a big fan of Johnny Gaudreau. I generally enjoy seeing undersized guys have success in hockey at any level, and Gaudreau had made it all the way to the top. He'd become an instant fan favourite in Columbus when he chose to play there as other players seemed to exodus out. Columbus have had to deal with a heartbreaking amount of tragedy, and while other fans enjoy dogpiling on our team that consistently steps on rakes, I doubt I'll be the only opposing fan who'll be rooting for the Blue Jackets just a little bit this year. In my Vibes video, I'd given Columbus a C. I'd graded them before the loss of Gaudreau and didn't really have the heart to change it. I'd considered just leaving them ungraded. There's no easy way to talk about the loss of Gaudreau in hockey terms. In the grand scheme of things, it's pretty meaningless. But the Blue Jackets are going to take to the ice this year, and so we must look ahead at a team and a fan base that are set for an extremely emotional season. Locked On Blue Jackets host Jay Forster spoke in terms of the Nottingham Panthers in the British Elite League last season, who lost almost every game following the death of Adam Johnson. The circumstances were very different, as Johnson was seriously injured on the ice in front of his teammates. But the Panthers were a strong team in the Elite League. The Blue Jackets were entering 24-25 already on low expectations, and they somehow have to harness the emotion of losing Gaudreau. Columbus's season opener isn't until October 15th and outside the purview of this video, but I expect it to be a heart-wrenching watch. You probably have to go back to January 2001 when the two teams met for the first time as expansion franchises, as the last time these two had a meaningful matchup. Neither of these franchises have been lighting a fire under anyone for a while now. However, Everson got binned off from the Wild just 19 disastrous games in last season, and when the schedule was released, it was obvious Everson feels like he has a score to settle, perhaps exacerbated by the fact he was very much the backup hire in Columbus. Instead of plumbing for the diplomatic answer, when asked about the game, Everson said,
"You know what I dislike is when ex-coaches go in and say, oh, this game means nothing to me. That's such bull. Of course it means something to you, right? I mean, they just fired me last year. Of course it means something. Do we want to win any more than we want to win game 2? No. I mean, you want to win every game, but does it mean something? Yeah, absolutely. But fortunately or unfortunately, I can't put skates on anymore. So, you know, we will do our best to get the team prepared to play that game 1 and definitely get off on the right foot.
Everson obviously made those comments prior to the accident that cost Johnny Gaudreau his life. Everson has the almost impossible task of getting his undermanned roster up for this season, but you can bet the Blue Jackets will do their best to honour Johnny Hockey's memory. Expect Columbus to demonstrate a ton of fire in this game. I should probably say something about the Wild. They are certainly a team that exists. But in all seriousness, the Wild have some great young talent in Rossi, Boldy and Faber. I was pretty cold on the Wild at first because their netminding is plainly bad. Not Korpisalo or Vanacek bad in that boring way the Wild managed to be good or bad in anything. But looking at how the West is shaping up, the Wild are one of the better placed mid-pack teams and have a realistic shout at getting back into the playoffs and playing 5 or 6 extra games before their golf season starts. Let's be honest, the Blues are going to be the window dressing in this game, much as Pittsburgh were last season when Connor Bedard made his NHL debut for Chicago. Macklin Celebrini may not be the generational talent that Connor Bedard is, but having skipped Steve Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault's Preds debut in favour of watching the Columbus Blue Jackets, I have to atone by watching Celebrini play his first meaningful game in the Shark Tank. Last year was a tough watch for Sharks fans, and it was borne out in some pretty poor attendances, which is a crying shame as at its best the Shark Tank is one of the best atmospheres in the NHL. It'll be interesting to see if Celebrini brings in fans like Bedard has in Chicago. I suspect the fact he has links to the Bay Area will help in the early days of the season, but the Sharks fans have other reasons to return to the tank this season aside from having a centre they can finally hang their hat on. Fabian Zetterlund flourished with the extra minutes on a terrible team last year and will now be paired with Celebrini and journeyman Tyler Toffoli, marking a massive upgrade on the top line. Meanwhile, Will Smith couldn't finish his Boston College career off with an NCAA championship, but 71 points in 41 games as an 18-19-year-old meant he achieved a higher points per game average than Celebrini. He makes the jump to the NHL with his collegiate and Hobey Baker finalist rival, and if deployed beside or beneath Celebrini or Granlund, the Sharks look to have a pretty solid top 6 now. Yaroslav Askarov is a goaltender both exciting and eccentric. The Sharks desperately needed to address their goaltending, and Askarov is certainly a pickup that will energize and frustrate fans in equal measure, although I suspect it will be Vanacek or Blackwood playing the initial salvos of the season, as it would be unreasonable to expect Askarov to backstop arguably the worst defensive core in the league. There's bound to be growing pains in San Jose, but Greer has done a remarkable job of turning the Sharks around given what a mess he inherited. He's certainly done favours in his cap retentions and taking on Cody Ceci, but that's the price of climbing out of the basement. Some may argue giving up a first round pick for Askarov is bad for a strip to the studs rebuild, but Greer and the Sharks are looking to return to competitiveness sooner rather than later, given their falling attendance, and while I don't think the Sharks will be anywhere near the postseason, I don't think they'll be as eye-bleedingly bad as last year. At home against a middling opponent, San Jose will be looking to avoid last season's debacle of 11 straight losses out the gates, and they should be good placed to do that. Here's an interesting matchup. Carolina finished a clear 13 points ahead of Tampa last season in the standings, but have lost a lot of the core that got them into the President's Trophy candidacy in the first place. However, on the scale of things, losing Shea, Gensel, Pesce, Nason and Teravainen may seem like the cost of doing business to retain Seth Jarvis and Martin Necas. Somehow Carolina are at the cap ceiling, which is ironic considering Tom Dundon is often characterised as cheap, despite turning the Canes around financially. That said, I'm not sure this Canes roster is great value, and it'll be interesting to see how they come out of the gates with so much firepower lost and reliant on a goaltending tandem that can be streaky. Brind'Amour was resigned to a 5-year contract in the offseason, much to the relief of most Canes fans, but there is still a vocal minority that are unhappy with the lack of playoff success, and if the team is hobbled by its off-season work, Brind'Amour could become the target of ire. I've repeatedly made comparisons between Julien Brisebois and Kelly McCrimmon, and the shenanigans that surrounded Steve Stamkos' contract negotiations last year seemed pretty indicative of that. I said in my Vibes video that I believe Tampa are a team headed toward a rebuild, and I stand by that. I feel like I'm being constantly gaslit about how good the Lightning still are. They only just scraped into the playoffs last year and did absolutely nothing in them. Now, part of that can be laid at the door of Vasilevsky, whose injury at the start of last season set the Bolts back. McDonough's return and the arrival of Gensel will be seen as upgrades on an aging Stamkos and an injury-prone Sergachev, but if anything, they're a sidestep with one of the weakest prospect pipelines in the league. I still expect Tampa to make the playoffs this season, but mostly because the competition is so weak in the East. But this game is more of a barometer to where both teams are. Are Carolina regressing? And how long can Brisebois keep the Bolts plate spinning? Okay, on paper this doesn't seem like a great matchup, but bear with me here, because I don't want to watch the Blues again. So picking through the bones of this game, you'd be forgiven for shrugging and heading to a bar. I mean, it's a Friday night, and if I had friends, I'd probably do the same. But I don't, and this is my only option, as I refuse to free-time St. Louis in a matter of days. Even Blues fans shouldn't. And hey, this is two teams I haven't seen, and it's a cross-conference matchup. Bonus! Last year, the Flyers massively overperformed, then completely derailed and ended up messing up their draft prospects. It was a double blow that will be partially salved by the arrival of Matvei Michkov. Michkov enters the season as the bookmakers' favourite for the Calder Trophy, and this matchup should herald his arrival on the NHL scene. This year's Calder Trophy race should be a little more interesting than last year, and Michkov takes the edge over Celebrini due to being a year older and seasoned in the KHL, where he has already shown himself to be a point-a-game player. He won't be a point-a-game player in the NHL just yet though, and while he joins a good young core in Philadelphia, I suspect this will be a weaker season in the city of brotherly love while they try and blood an inexperienced goaltending group and a defensive core that will likely never see Ryan Ellis again. Speaking of overachieving, the Canucks, like the Flyers, entered last season as outsiders and overperformed only to disappoint in the end. Hey look, I found a compelling link for this game. Much like the Flyers, the Canucks lost their starting goaltender, although for less sinister reasons. And while it happened largely in the playoffs, Vancouver struggled through the first round before almost shutting down the Oilers. Indeed, the Canucks didn't so much overachieve as flatter to deceive, as their ascendancy was based on somewhat unsustainable statistics and the performances of Thatcher Demko. Demko is still questionable for the start of the season, and while Arturs Shilovs did remarkably well in the playoffs, he's so far been a sub-900 goalie, and it'll be interesting to see if Elias Pettersson can rekindle his form, as he was struggling with a knee injury and was decidedly poor in the playoffs, going from an above point-a-game regular season player to a sub-500 point-a-game player in the playoffs. This could be a high score or a damp squib. Look, I'm not Nostradamus. Los Angeles continues their East Coast tour to start the season in Boston. This campaign could be carnage in LA if it goes sideways. Rob Blake is already on a short leash, and entering his 8th season heading the front office in LA, his position has never been so precarious. Ridding LA of Pierre-Luc Dubois was a big step in healing wounds, but in truth the damage was done losing Alex Iafallo and Gabe Velarde in a trade for a busted flush. Quentin Byfield is expected to move into centre this season, having seen his production blow up from the wing last year. Byfield was originally a centre, so this move was expected, but if the Kings lose some of his production from last year, LA will be dependent on a 37-year-old Andrei Kopitar, whose advanced stats were starting to decline last campaign, and a bomber season from a sophomore pro in Alex Laferriere. I gave LA an E in my vibes video, and I expect the Kings to be a bubble team at best. By comparison, I gave Boston a B, which only really stands if this game starts with Jeremy Swayman in net rather than Younes Korpisalo. As I write this, Swayman still hasn't signed a contract, and as sneaky good as I expect Boston to be, at least defensively, there's only so much the defense can do if the goalie is repeatedly shitting the bed. Korpisalo has been signed to be a backup, and that is probably where he is best. It would be a bitter pill for Bruins fans who've been graced with the Swayman-Ullmark bromance in recent years to end up with Swayman sitting out and Ullman away. I'd expect Boston to win this, but an afternoon face-off may sap the usually vociferous Bostonian crowd, and if Korpisalo is in the net, all bets will be off. I do expect Swayman will have signed before I finished editing this, and if he has, I can't be bothered re-recording all this. This might not be the closest matchup. What are you doing, NHL? You could have had a full slate of games. Why would you leave this gap here? Why would you do this? No, don't adjust your sets. I am recommending Carolina and Tampa Bay again. Why? Well, aside from the Ottawa-Montreal matchup, none of the 7 PM face-offs are really grabbing me, and a return fixture a day later has a playoff feel with two teams that could feasibly be a playoff matchup come April. Who knows what kind of shenanigans may be brewing after the first game. Also, this helps me with a script that is expanding faster than a number of video games Tommy Tallarico has worked on. Take what I said a few minutes ago, reverse the order, and boom. If the NHL just started the season on a weekend, I could have really shortened this up. I mean, flip a coin between this and Anaheim at San Jose. Well, unless you're a Blackhawks or Oilers fan, but I mean, that's a lopsided matchup. This fixture pitches two teams with long-shot aspirations of playoff hockey. Aspirations which I find unlikely for both, actually really unlikely to be honest. Philadelphia enter the matchup on the second leg of their Western Canada tour, which probably isn't the schedule Tortorella was rooting for. Still, it might be a bonding experience for a young team and newcomers in Michkov and Fedotov. Calgary, meanwhile, enter the season with possibly the wonkiest and most unbalanced roster in the league. Conroy hasn't headed the front office for long and has been moving pieces around like a sliding puzzle going increasingly out of whack, desperately avoiding committing to a dreaded rebuild. The Huberdeau contract is a nightmare from which Calgary won't wake until 2031, and while it wasn't quite Jonathan Cheechoo levels of drop-off, Huberdeau did not perform anywhere near a $10.5 million forward last year. Dustin Wolf and Matt Coronato are youthful foundation stones for a Flames rebuild, but this feels a bit like a Calgary team in denial against a Philadelphia team in the growing pains of a rebuild. One wonders how Nazem Kadri will enjoy the season. According to his reported displeasure at the Flames roster, I would guess unhappily. If either team have ambitions of making the postseason, they'll need to get off to a good start, so this has the potential to be an exciting matchup, especially as both teams could be icing rookie netminders. On a more serious note, this will be Calgary's home opener, and much as in Columbus, Calgary is city in mourning for Johnny Gaudreau, and it's sure to be an emotional evening, however the Flames decide to commemorate their fallen former fan favourite. As usual, Sunday is a dog-ends collection of matchups, and picking games from this slate is difficult as some teams are only going to have about 22 hours between contests. At least this first Battle of Alberta will see two teams who will both be poorly rested. Woo. I come from the UK. Our league plays games on Saturday evenings and Sunday afternoons, and those Sunday afternoon games can be decidedly lacking in energy with two teams playing on bandy legs. And so this could be a somewhat anticlimactic Battle of Alberta, and this will probably be exacerbated by where both teams are developmentally. Edmonton enters the season as losing Stanley Cup finalists, and it will be intriguing to see if there's a hangover from the devastating nature of their loss. This will be their third consecutive home game, so if there is, they should have largely worked out by now, but then again, they started last season like a sloth on Quaaludes. While the Draisaitl drama is sorted, Edmonton haven't really addressed their blue line, which lost Philip Broberg in a spectacularly overpaid fashion, and Cody Ceci, which might not be the worst thing. But the remnants beyond the top pairing is a tad threadbare, with Darnell Nurse underperforming on his contract, and an underwhelming collection of D-men supplementing the back end. Then again, with Bouchard, Hyman, McDavid and Draisaitl, the Oilers don't need much production from, well, anyone else, and yet they've supplemented their offense with Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner. Calgary, meanwhile, will have had to track across Alberta in the hours between their game with the Flyers. So the more I look at this, the more disappointing this game is looking, so expect it to be my best suggestion of the lot. The opening week/weekend, stupid NHL, ends back in Vegas, and to be honest, you'll probably miss the start of this game unless you opted for the Minnesota-Winnipeg matchup. Or Edmonton are blowing out Calgary, I suppose. This is the only 10 PM East Coast time face-off, and by virtue of that, this game gets a shout-out. Well, I suppose I end the weekend seeing Anaheim, so that's another team ticked off. Funny story, I generally keep a record of all the games I watch and keep a tally of how many times I see a team through a year. Barring blackouts, I generally watch the matchup with the closest betting odds or the two teams closest in the standings. Toward the end of the season, I generally watch when the bubble teams play each other or teams playing for President's Trophies or there's some reason for some fire in the game. As such, for the last few years, Anaheim are a team I have watched when absolutely no other option was available to me. So I guess it's good I can bag an Anaheim game early in the season. So what can I say about this game? Anaheim was my shortest entry in my Vibes video because I have so little to say about Anaheim, almost to the point I had to hardly edit anything out for the short. They're a team in rebuild, quietly doing almost nothing in free agency. Cutter Gauthier is currently 4th for bookmakers in Calder contention, and this would be a little more exciting if the opposition was Philadelphia. Actually, a line comprised of Gauthier, Zegras and Vetrano could certainly be entertaining, and Anaheim have one of the best collection of youngsters in the league. I gave Anaheim a D+ in my Vibes video, and in retrospect I think that's a terrible take given what I gave Philadelphia, Montreal, Chicago and San Jose. However, with that said, while the bonnet of the Anaheim Ducks is already in the car wash, the boot is still covered in shit outside. While the forward portion of the Ducks is very much under construction, the blue line seems to be trapped in amber, and worse, John Gibson reportedly wants to move on. What else can I say about Vegas? I think it's important to point out, in the intro of my Vibes video I did say there were teams in my F tier that I expect to make the playoffs, and as Vegas were the only F tier team, it tells you everything you need to know about what I expect the Knights to achieve this year. As for this game, well, the Golden Knights should win it, but then again, Anaheim have made a habit of starting fast before rapidly falling away, so it's anyone's guess. I'm not here to give betting tips. And with that, I'm going to go to bed. Apologies if I haven't mentioned your team. Bear in mind, I haven't mentioned my own because I think the Islanders are going to be a dreadful watch. Personally, I find the best way to watch the Islanders are in highlights where I can only watch the Islanders' goals and pretend they've gone unbeaten all year, or at least until they get shut out for the first time. With that said, if you want a betting tip, put money on the Islanders to be shut out in their October 10th season opener against Utah. Tell me in the comments down below what games you'll be watching in the NHL's opening week and if you enjoy this video, please like, subscribe and share, as it's always appreciated and it helps my videos be seen. I'm back off to sea, but I have a vlog where I follow the British national ice hockey team as they tried to qualify for the Winter Olympics. I mean, follow like a fan, not like some kind of stalker. Anyway, I have that video in the works and hopefully I'll get it scheduled before I leave to come out mid-trip. But if not, well, I'm moving home when I get back, so it may be a while, so enjoy the first third of the season, and with any luck you'll hear from me before the new year. And until then, I don't know, watch someone better.